welcome to the 2025 new NOAA Fisheries EBFM seminar series. This series started over 7 years ago thanks to our NOAA Fisheries EBM team, and we're welcome our speaker today. Our purpose originally back in the day was to increase awareness about ecosystem-based management, specifically fisheries management, and to highlight our progress to date, not only within NOAA Fisheries, but also the work that our partners are taking. And we have an excellent archive, thanks to the NOAA library, who has archived many of our talks over the last 6-7 years. So that's a great resource, and I welcome folks to go check that archive out. And as I said, the library, NOAA Library, has always been a great host, co-host in the series, and we look forward to working with them into the future. This series is offered on the second Wednesday of each month at this time frame. And our next speaker is Kelly Dennett, who is our NOAA Sustainable Fisheries Office Director, and that'll be on February 12th. And her talk will focus in on what we're doing with respect to EBFM and the progress we've made to date. Today, we are so happy to have Janne Haugen joining us from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. And she's going to be focusing in on supporting advancing global ecosystem-based management. So please join me in welcoming Janne.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me. I am excited to be here today and to talk a little bit about a few research projects that I have been involved with in the past couple of years. As mentioned, I will be talking about advancing global ecosystem-based management. So this is not just from a NOAA or a US-only perspective. So if you only have 1 minute with me today, here's what I want you to take away from this seminar. There's progress on implementing EBM globally. We have solutions to overcome the majority of the remaining challenges. We have ways of assessing when EBM is performing successfully. And there are some social costs to not doing EBM, and making resource managers, businesses, and the public more aware of those costs through solutions such as business cases and marketing can hopefully spur some action. So a quick outline of what you can expect today. I will give a brief introduction to why we need EBM before I'll be talking about the global progress on implementing EBM, as well as some of the remaining challenges and solutions to those challenges. I will discuss how we can measure successful EBM implementation, and then lastly, I will present a couple out-of-the-box approaches to further advance EBM. So why ecosystem-based management? Marine ecosystems provide goods and services that are essential for human and societal well-being, but the oceans are facing multiple challenges that prevent marine ecosystems from thriving and from meeting our expectations. Additionally, there's a multitude of sectors that are operating in the same space, and they are relying on the same marine resources. So traditional siloed management, which is sector by sector, isn't sufficient to solve all of these challenges we have. Additionally, there's no standard protocol for multi-ocean use conflict management and how to solve those and deal with trade-offs. So EBM can not only help ensure functional and resilient ecosystems, it can also explicitly address those trade-offs between the sectors. And because of that, EBM can help us achieve multiple policy objectives in addition to bringing on new opportunities. And so we know we need to do ecosystem-based management, and there has been agreement on the need for EBM for more than 20 years at this point. But it's been more challenging to implement than we thought it would be, and implementation has been a little bit slow. But the good thing is, the discussion on EBM has shifted from what is EBM and why should we do it to how do we do it and when can we implement it. So EBM has moved away from theoretical ideas and something that would be nice to do to a more operationalized approach. And so in the next slides, I'm going to dive into a few studies that I have been involved with that look at how far we've come in implementing EBM on a global scale. So the idea to evaluate the progress on implementing EBM was formed by the Marine Ecosystem-Based Management Progress Evaluation Group, or the MEBMPEG. Now, this is a group of people that have decades of experience, and they have really advanced the field of EBM. And I have been fortunate enough to collaborate with these brilliant scientists to conduct some of this work. So first off, to evaluate progress on EBM, we conducted an international poll where over 150 EBM experts or EBM practitioners from around the world responded to multiple choice as well as open-ended questions regarding their work, personal experiences, and their thoughts on EBM. We then used the preliminary results from the poll to guide questions and discussion topics for a 4-day workshop with 40 of these EBM experts. We have since published the results in a paper last year, and I'll have a link to the paper at the end of my presentation if you are interested in more details than what I'm presenting here today. So one of the questions that we asked all of these experts was, how has your EBM changed in the last decade? And as you can see from the responses, people's EBM work has become a higher priority. The work itself has become more operational than theoretical. It's become more interdisciplinary, and there's also a much broader focus than it was just 10 years ago. But if we look at the support people get to do the EBM work, and support being financial, it can be trainings, more staff, etc., we see that both organizations and jurisdictions make promises to support ecosystem-based management, but when it comes to actually providing that support, they fall short. So there's a large difference between promised and actual given support for EBM. Now, promises of increased support for EBM is good. It means that we want to do EBM, but both organizations as well as jurisdictions need to actually follow through with that promise. So if we think about what actual EBM work is, we know that it's rooted in multiple objectives and principles, and there are various definitions of EBM, but they are more or less covering the same principles. And there are several other paradigms and approaches that work under many of the same principles as EBM, but with slightly different focus or emphasis. So we wanted to know if this global group of EBM experts work on other non-EBM related topics, and if EBM is called by other names in their work. Now, the interesting takeaway from this is that based on the poll results and the workshop discussion, we found that EBM is often practiced under different paradigms. And that makes perfect sense because EBM itself is not a revolutionary concept in terms of principles and objectives. It's very similar to other approaches, as all of these concepts considers ecological, economic, social-cultural, as well as institutional or governance aspects. But again, they have slightly different emphasis on the various topics. And we can see that clearly in this graph from Stevenson et al. In 2021. So even if you don't call your work EBM, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing EBM work if you're working under a different paradigm. If we're looking at the spatial extent on where the EBM work is taking place, we see that EBM is being implemented from smaller bays and harbors to large marine ecosystems and distinct seas, but less so on larger areas such as ocean basins. In terms of jurisdictions, we see that the majority of EBM work is national, but it's important to recognize that EBM takes place from local to international levels as well. But here's the thing. For EBM to fully work, we need to have all sectors engaged and on board. You're not really doing EBM if you're only talking to and engaging one sector. And based on our results, there are still some sectors that are not engaging in EBM, they're not participating, and that's a problem. So if we look at the top 6 impediments to EBM implementation that we identified by the poll results as well as our workshop discussions, we see that engaging stakeholders is a major impediment, along with governance, level of support, understanding of EBM, and in some areas, technology and data are still a challenge, as well as overall communication. We also identified solutions to those challenges, such as increasing capacity and support, changing incentives by the use of certification schemes, adding marketing, and building a business case for EBM, as well as a few others. And I know that looking at these challenges, they're not small. And I'm not saying it's easy to overcome the challenge of, let's say, governance structures in any situation. But we do provide some solutions that we think can help get us there eventually. And finally, the takeaway from this is that it's important to acknowledge the progress that we've already made. We do see that the work has become more operational. There's more understanding on what EBM is. EBM is often practiced under different paradigms. We practice EBM at multiple spatial scales. And so we are advancing EBM globally. And we do that more so than we previously thought. And I hope that we can continue that trend moving forward. So a question that stood out to me after we finished our workshop and we submitted our paper was, how do we measure success in ecosystem-based management? Let's say we overcome all of the challenges and we implement EBM. How do we know if we are doing it right? And what does successful EBM look like? Now, ideally, we want functional and resilient ecosystems that provide goods and services. We want multiple thriving industries. We want protection of vulnerable species and habitats. We want everyone to get along and so on. And one of the ways of assessing if we have achieved all of that is by using performance measures. Now, there are many performance measures for single sectors, such as fisheries, but we weren't able to find any performance measures that integrated across ocean use sectors and also included human dimensions. So we created a framework to try to capture how well EBM is performing or not. So in order to answer the question of how well EBM is performing, we need to know something about performance of the individual sectors. We need to know the status of the marine ecosystem. We need to know if it is managed and how trade-offs are dealt with. And lastly, we need to include the larger human dimensions of the system. So the idea is that you can combine all of this information and then synthesize if EBM is performing as expected and how successful we have been at implementing EBM. Now, to evaluate a performance measure target, if that has been met, we use publicly available information, ecosystem status reports, as well as expert opinion. So let's take a closer look at the first category in our framework. So in the framework, we list several sectors. We ask if that sector is relevant to your case. If that is yes, then you have several performance targets to choose from, depending on what data you have available. And if that target has been met, you get a full score, say 1 out of 1. And if the sector is relevant, but the target has not been met, you get a 0 out of 1. So it's pretty straightforward. And you continue down the rows going through all the sectors, evaluating if they are relevant, if they met their target. And like I mentioned, most of these sectors already have performance measures or key performance indicators that they use to evaluate their own performance. And that's what we're using here. These are all performance measures the sectors themselves use to evaluate their success according to their objectives. So it's not performance measures or indicators with an agenda on our end of what we think it should be. So I know this is a small screenshot of the framework here that you can't really see. So I've highlighted some of the sectors and some of the performance measures that we use in the red box here. So we, for example, for commercial fisheries, we often use landings relative to maximum sustainable yield. For coastal development, it could be number of new projects. For shipping, it's proportion of on-time arrivals. And again, we have many to choose from. So our second task is to evaluate the status of the marine ecosystem. Now, this consists of familiar indicators and reference points, at least to us in the fisheries world, as these parameters are often used in ecosystem status reports around the world. Some examples that we've used here is biodiversity, ecosystem overfishing, number of protected, endangered, and threatened species, as well as multiple others. So the framework also allows you to add in your own indicators if there's something that's specific to your situation that we haven't captured. And then obviously, if there are indicators listed that are not relevant to your situation, you can turn those off and just give them a 0 out of 0, and they will not count towards your total. So the first two categories, the sector performance and the marine ecosystem status, have been pretty straightforward. We were able to use a lot of the existing information to fill these out. But for the third category, it wasn't that straightforward, as evaluating management and trade-offs in a socio-ecological system is challenging. But we developed several yes and no questions that relate to EBM principles and objectives in order to evaluate if the current management setup is successful according to the most common EBM principles. So some of the questions that we asked for this category was, is there an ecosystem management plan in place? Are the sectors engaging with each other? Does that engagement lead to anything? Are decisions made at appropriate levels? And then multiple other questions as well. Now, the human dimensions category takes a broader look at the region of the case study, and it also includes indicators that are not exclusive to the marine environment or the coastal communities. For example, a wellness index in food security. So a lot of these indicators do not have obvious performance targets. So to quantify this, we use time series as well as directionalities. For example, we generally want the number of insurance claims or lawsuits to go down, and we want happiness and food security to go up. And so we say that the performance target has been met if the trend is going in the desired direction for that indicator. So the idea is that you can sum all of this up, and then you can apply this framework to various situations around the world. But before we did that, we wanted to make sure that it actually worked. So we needed to test the framework to see if it could distinguish between EBM positive and EBM negative circumstances. So we used the framework on two hypothetical case studies. One that represented what we called EBM Nirvana, which is a place where all of the principles of EBM are effectively implemented and everything's great. And then a non-EBM scenario, which is just a cascade of environmental, economic, and social crisis. So as you can see, there's a clear difference between the cases, meaning our framework could distinguish between successful and not successful EBM implementation. And so we applied the framework to 5 different cases from around the world. And the takeaway here is that if we only look at one individual category, for example, sector performance, we would conclude that EBM is performing well. Similarly, if we only look at marine ecosystem status, we might say that EBM is performing terribly. So we miss the nuances in each case. And so to evaluate how well EBM is performing, we have to include some information from all 4 categories in order to get the full picture. Additionally, all of this is connected, right? So we see that the higher scores in the management and trade-off category are correlated with higher scores in the marine ecosystem status category. And sector performance can never really receive a full score when ecosystem status scores are low, because several of these sectors, for example, fisheries, directly rely on good ecosystem status. So if we improve our management and trade-offs category, the idea is that the other categories can improve as well. So the human dimensions category is a bit different. As I mentioned previously, it includes broader indicators that are not solely related to the ocean. For example, food security in coastal areas is an indicator that we used, but food security does not mean only seafood, right? People eat other types of food as well. So this category can score higher even with low scores in the other categories. So there are, of course, some caveats with this framework. We deliberately put an equal weight to all of the indicators and all of the categories. So we can always have the discussion if some indicators are more important than others. We also only use lagging indicators. So the framework is not able to make predictions. That would be great, but currently not something it's able to do. And then all of our case studies are relatively data rich. We do acknowledge that, and it would be great to test the framework on a more data limited case. Again, we tried to find data where we could, but we do rely on expert opinion for filling out this framework, which could introduce some bias. And although we do produce a quantitative number, it really isn't about the score number or which case studies score the highest, but it's about what lies behind that number and how you can use that information to improve. So there needs to be some caution on just blindly comparing scores from one case study to another. With that said, when we synthesized the case studies, it did suggest that when EBM is functioning as intended and when EBM is successful, both the ecosystem and the ocean use sectors benefit. And we can use this framework to compare regions to each other, but it's most useful to evaluate the same region perhaps every 5 years or so that we can see the progress we've made and how we are improving. So this framework integrates semi-quantitative information from various fields of study, practices, as well as economic sectors. It allows for flexible and comprehensive indicator selection. You can add on region-specific indicators when that is relevant. And it's a relatively simple and straightforward framework that integrates across categories and sectors, which is what we set out to create. So we hope that this will have a broad applicability globally, as it does provide a clear mechanism for tracking EBM progress, and it also helps to identify areas that needs focused attention. So now that we have evaluated progress on EBM and we built a framework to identify if our EBM implementation is successful, I want to bring us back to the solutions, to the remaining impediments that I talked about earlier. Are these solutions actually feasible? It's very easy to throw out an idea and call it a solution. But if we can't execute it, it's not helpful and it won't solve anything. So we wanted to actually try to tackle some of these solutions and out of the box approaches that we suggested and try to prove that this can be done. So one of the major challenges that we identified to EBM implementation was engagement from stakeholders. As we've seen, we are making progress, but it's slow. So we started thinking of non-traditional approaches, at least from a scientist perspective, that we could use to engage more stakeholders in EBM. And I say that because we need to explore new ways of doing this. Because like I said, it's been agreement and communicated the need to do EBM for more than 20 years at this point. So simply relying on the information deficient model, the one that says information alone is enough, is not a guarantee that the information reaches the intended audience or that the audience actually understands and process that information. So simply putting information out there in the form of a paper, a protocol, or an implementation framework, etc., is most times not going to result in desirable, if any, actions. So the information deficient model assumes that the public can process information in a rational manner, but we know that's not always the case. So I'm going to briefly mention two out-of-the-box approaches that can help with engaging stakeholders and sectors in EBM that we haven't previously thought about using for this purpose. So first off is making a business case for EBM. A business case is a proposal for a new strategy or large initiative, but it can also be thought of as a story that explains the anticipated return on investment for a project. It typically begins with a statement of a business problem, and then it explores how it can be solved and what the value of solving that problem is. So in the case of EBM, the problems have been relatively well documented, and EBM itself has been proposed as the primary means of solving those problems. But the value of doing that hasn't been well characterized. And so this idea of making a business case for EBM is not new. It has been discussed in several papers already, but it's mostly been an idea without any numbers or actual cases attached to it. So Jason Link led this work in making a business case for ecosystem-based management. And we developed 4 hypothetical but reality-based examples. So first we have multi-species fisheries assessment modeling for management, which would be the EBM approach, versus single species management, the business as usual approach. And then we have a case study on preserving versus restoring mangrove swamps versus man-made breakwalls in coastal areas. We also have a case study for integrating environmental impact assessments for siting of offshore renewable energy. And we know quantifying all of this is not always possible, and it's not necessarily easy to get all the data you need for this. So we also wanted to include a more qualitative example related to development of coastal wetlands with and without varying degrees of mitigation. So here are the results from making a business case for ecosystem-based management. I'm not going to go into details of these case studies here today, but the paper was just published and I have a link to this as well as the other papers at the end of my presentation. I also want to just highlight that all of the numbers used to get these estimates are based on publicly available information. So if you want to look at the results, as you can see, EBM is more cost effective than business as usual in all four cases. There are possibilities for substantial cost savings across the board. These cases are meant to illustrate the value proposition of adopting a broader EBM approach over business as usual. And we hope that by showing that to businesses, organizations, stakeholders, the public, and everyone else, that hopefully we can increase EBM participation and support. So the second out of the box approach that I am going to briefly mention is marketing. Marketing has not previously been explored for ecosystem-based management, but there have been several successful public marketing campaigns for single sectors or single issues in ocean sustainability. Just think of the plastic straw ban. It's not the biggest issue in our oceans, but everyone everywhere knows about it now. And there are laws and regulations to prevent the use of plastic straws. And so we think that marketing EBM can help solve some of the challenges to implementation, such as increased awareness and engagement from stakeholders and the public. But EBM is a bit more complex than a plastic straw, right? It spans much more than one issue and one sector. So what does a marketing campaign for EBM look like? Well, it might look like this. We're not sure yet. Jason Link and I have been working with Avi Litwek, who is incredibly talented at designing graphics. And he's made several of the NOAA graphics that you've all probably seen. So here are a few of the many graphics that we have come up with to try to convey why EBM matters to everyone, everywhere. And this is an ongoing project. Nothing is set in stone. We are happy to receive feedback and comments on how we can continue to develop this in a way that resonates with the public. I just want to emphasize that the bottom line on why we're taking this marketing approach is that there needs to be a behavioral change, right, on an international scale to further implement EBM and to overcome some of the remaining challenges. And marketing can be a very powerful tool to help change people's attitudes from business as usual towards ecosystem-based management. So to summarize what I have talked about today, we have seen that there is progress on implementing ecosystem-based management. We have ways of assessing if EBM implementation is successful, and we can leverage new approaches to continue the trend of advancing EBM. We've seen that the gap between EBM theory and implementation is closing, as we are making progress on implementing EBM globally. We do still have some challenges left that we need to solve, but there are viable solutions out there. And there are also out-of-the-box approaches that can contribute to advancing global EBM effectively. So here are some of the references to the papers that I discussed today if you are interested in more details. And with that, I want to say thank you for your attention, and I hope it was worth your time. I'm happy to answer any questions here, and you can also reach out to me via email or socials. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation and sharing your work with us.
Cassandra, this is Peg. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
But while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I just wanted to do a plug for Janne Haugen's session that is scheduled for February 14th at the AAAS meeting in Boston. It will look at, the focus of that is a tangible EBM to deliver biodiversity targets. Janne and Jason Link, who she mentioned earlier, are leading that session at the AAAS meeting this coming February 14th. and that'll be at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston. So I thought I'd put that note in there for folks who are interested in following up on a lot of these discussions that we're having here today.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Peg. And it looks like we did have one question come in. Was there anything surprising to you that came out of the business as usual work?
Thank you. I think I'm assuming you mean the business case work. I wasn't expecting EBM to be cheaper in the long term for all of the cases. So I say that was the most surprising thing. And the fact that we can save a lot of money by not having that many revisions and not having that many meetings about the same thing with the same people. That was a surprising result. And also, I think I didn't mention this, but something about stakeholder fatigue, especially related to environmental impact assessments and how we use those for offshore wind siting. We have a lot of the stakeholders repeat themselves a lot to the same people over and over again. And if we could try to combine these efforts a little bit more, we could reduce some of the stakeholder fatigue for that as well. So I'd say that was the two surprising elements that came out of that work.
Could you comment on how data poor cases might change your results for this work and the other analysis?
Great question. I'm not, at least for the performance measures, we only had relatively data-rich sources, which meant that we had a lot of indicators that we had data for. We did see that, I think it was the Red Sea case, where we only had 8 indicators that we used that we could find data for in the human dimensions category. And so that scored relatively well. And if we had data for more indicators to include in that category, we suspect that the score might not have been that high. So yes, it would change the results a little bit. We do say that you need to have at least 3 indicators in each category. But to get the most useful results, you probably want to include quite a bit more than that.
All right, our next question. The spider plot of case studies show EBM performs well in 3 axes in spite of not performing well in the ecosystem status. Is this an indication that ecosystem status indicators are not particularly correlated with the other objectives?
Great question. So I think I briefly touched on it, how the different categories are related to each other. And a lot of the sectors, rely on good ecosystem status. So they are somewhat related, but they're not related to everything in all of the different categories. For example, the human dimensions category includes a lot of non-ecosystem specific information as well. So some of them, yes, but not always.
Given that this is a global framework, is there work being done in collaboration with NOAA offices working on IUU fishing internationally to further EBM efforts?
Wow, I love that question. So we say it's a global framework because it can be applied globally. I am not aware of all of the collaborations that my colleagues in NOAA work on. There might be something going on. I am not involved in anything like that, but we do have a few projects planned coming up this year. We're not entirely sure where things are going to go, so there might be something, but like I said, I'm not involved in anything like that currently, and I'm not sure if anyone else within NOAA is. They might be.
Okay, our next question. Are there thresholds or timeframes used with the metrics? Example for something like ROI For wind energy, I imagine they want to see ROI greater than 1 within a certain time frame, which might not line up with other sector or ecosystem timeframes.
Thank you. That's a great question. We didn't set a time frame for any of the indicators or thresholds, but you can. I would then suggest that you have the same time frame throughout the framework, right? We do suggest that maybe you could reassess the whole case study after 5 years or so, just to give the ecosystem and well as the users some time for change to happen, as a lot of these changes are not happening overnight. But if you wanted to put a threshold for the indicators, it would be good to use the same thing overall. Like you mentioned, it wouldn't necessarily be the same for all of the indicators in all of the sectors, but no, we did not specify that.
What process was used to define the 4 axes for the objectives? Were there proposals for other axes?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. We looked at all of the objectives that we typically have for EBM, and then we try to categorize things into our 4 categories. Not sure if that answers your question or if you can specify, but I'd say this is how we came to our structured framework.
Sounds good. Thank you. And that looks like that's all the questions we have in the queue. I'll give it a second just to see if that last question gets a follow-up entry or not. But otherwise, thank you again for sharing your work with us. And thank you, Peg, for organizing this event. Do you have any last comments, Peg?
No, I just want to thank Jana. She's done a tremendous job today, and I appreciate her effort to present today. And welcome any other suggestions for future seminar speakers from the audience if you have any ideas about follow-on. So thank you very much, and Happy New Year to all. I hope you all have a safe year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today, audience. We hope to see you next month, and enjoy the rest of your day.